This time when it came to research, we sent the entire level design team along. What we wanted them to do was experience firsthand what it feels like to drive on the roads in Italy and France, and then come back to the studio with all of that experience, and along with the DEM data, start crafting the roads that were going to form our world.
Every single car trip that we did, even to a location, was documented. Some of the newer techniques that we used with the research itself were things like photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is basically a process where you can be on location and take quite a few photographs of a particular feature that you find really interesting, such as cliff faces, surface detail, etc. And that means that when we take those photographs back into the studio, we can put that through a process. And what that gives us is a lifelike asset that has all of those characteristics that you would expect to have in the real world. Being able to go on location, find something that we loved, and almost take like a digital version of it back with us to the studio to put in the game. With the shift to physically based materials and the whole system, the interaction between light and surface became really important and actually a really powerful tool for us in terms of describing the world that we wanted Horizon 2 to be in. The second newer piece of tech that we used was using something called DEM data, which basically fleshed out our world, and that allowed us to have really free-form and natural landscapes, so hills, mountains. That all came from that initial piece of data. But one of the things that is really famous about the Côte d'Azur is the quality of light. I mean, it's been famous for hundreds of years with artists. When we wanted to recreate that, we didn't want to have an artist just giving us an impression of that, choosing a colour from a colour picker. We wanted to go to a really anal level of detail with it and actually model something proper. So what we did was we got one of the rendering engineers to build us a working model of Earth's atmosphere, which sounds crazy, but it works fantastically. So that takes into account phenomenon like Rayleigh scattering, which is actually why the sky is blue. It all comes down to the intensity of the sun and how that's displaced through millions of particles in the atmosphere. But that also gives us red sunsets and the kind of yellow haze you would expect at certain times of the day. But then that also ties in directly to our weather. So when a sky becomes slightly grey in a storm, that's all because the amount of particulates in the atmosphere have changed and have ramped up. And that's something we can obviously model. And the way we drive rain is we drive it all consecutively from that piece of information as a starting point. So as the atmosphere becomes more intense and more laden with particulates and moisture, it'll get to a point where there's a threshold, and then rain will actually start to fall, and it will start to gather onto the road, onto the car. And again, thanks to the shift to physically based material, all of that stuff works in a really authentic manner. So cracks in the road will fill up with water. All of the car materials will receive the raindrops and look particularly fantastic.
Our job as sound designers is to support the visuals, and if we're doing our job right, you actually shouldn't be able to kind of notice the sound in some respects. If something's wrong, somebody might pick up on it, but great sound should support the picture. So at any one time, there's probably about 4 or 5 different emitters coming from the car. So engine, exhaust, intake. If there's any special bits on the car, like a turbo or a supercharger, they're all playing audio as well. In terms of the environment, there's usually about 20-30 emitters all playing at the same time, simulating the trees, weather, rain, wind, everything from little bugs to tannoys in the distance and music coming from the festival. When we record cars, we usually have about 8 channels to use. So usually, depending on the car, about 3 to 4 mics around the exhaust system and about 4 kind of on the engine as well. In terms of trackside, we usually have about 2 or 3 people on the track capturing car buys, getting the cars rolling up to us and stuff as well. And all that gets synced up and brought into one big session that we can build from when we're building the audio for the cars. We don't always go for 100% realism, and we want to go for what sounds great for the player. So when we mix bonnet cam to chase cam, we want to both those views be sounding great for all players. Maybe with something like the Huracan where the engine's rear engine, we don't necessarily put all the engine to the back. We want to envelop the player so that when they're playing in that view, it sounds great. There's little tweaks we do, like maybe boost the surfaces slightly in that view, but generally we want every view to sound awesome. And we actually simulate the sound of weather completely differently, whether you're on interior cam or exterior. It's not just a filter that's applied when you're in interior cam. It is completely different sounds that are playing, and it's simulated completely differently, right down to the detail of the windscreen wipers sounding different whether you're inside the car or outside the car.
Every single road we have now is so nuanced and full of movement and character that you can drive it 100 times and you'll discover something different about it every time. Now when you combine that with the cars of Forza, cars that have their own character, their own unique set of strengths and weaknesses. And then you throw weather and time of day into the mix. We have a driving experience that's so varied and so high quality that it's unrivaled.